The Velinari Empire had conquered 47 worlds in 3 centuries, but never had they faced anything like the humans of Terra Prime. Captain Chris Valerian watched through the observation decks. Reinforced glass as the last human transport ship exploded in a brilliant orange fireball against the star-speckled void. The orbital bombardment had been thorough, every major city reduced to molten slag, every military installation vaporized, every spaceport turned to glass. Below them, the planet that had once housed 8 billion souls now glowed with the angry red of cooling magma. Efficiency incarnate, murmured High Admiral Zethkari, his forearms folded behind his back in the traditional Velinari posture of satisfaction. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the bridge lights, and his compound eyes reflected the dying world below. The humans fought well, but they lacked the wisdom to surrender when defeat was inevitable. Chris said nothing. The human colonies had held out for 18 months against impossible odds, their makeshift fleets cobbled together from mining vessels, and civilian transport somehow managing to bloody the nose of the most powerful armada in the galaxy. But numbers were numbers, and the Velinari had brought 3,000 warships to humanity's 100. "Sir," came the voice of Communications Officer Thalmoris. "We're receiving a final transmission from the planetary surface. It's from the human government bunker. Put it through," Zethkari ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the smoke-filled interior of what had once been an underground command center. A human female, her dark hair matted with blood and her military uniform torn, stared directly into the camera. Behind her, the sounds of combat echoed, the whine of energy weapons, the screams of the dying. "I am Director Larrakeen of the Terran Defense Coalition," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "In 5 minutes, this bunker will be overrun. We have no ships left, no orbital defenses, no hope of rescue. But I want you to know we will not be the last humans you face." A massive explosion rocked the bunker behind her, and she stumbled but continued speaking. "Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, wars that consumed continents. We built civilizations. From the ashes of the old, reached for the stars when others said it was impossible. You think you've ended us, but you've only scattered us, and scattered seeds." She smiled, a cold expression that made Chris's blood run cold. "Scattered seeds take root in the strangest places." The transmission cut to static. "Primitive bravado," Zethkari dismissed with a wave of his upper right arm. "Scan the planet. Ensure no significant life signs remain." "Sir," Thalmoris reported after several minutes. "Sensors detect 1 human life sign. Female, approximately 30 standard years old, located in the northern continent's deep cave systems. She appears to be alone and badly injured. Shall I order a strike team to eliminate her?" asked Commander Velthos, the ship's tactical officer. Zethkari paused, considering. The Velinari had a policy of total extermination when dealing with particularly troublesome species, but they also had a code of honor. To deploy a strike team against a single wounded survivor seemed wasteful. "No," he decided. "Let her die slowly. It will be a more fitting end to their species, not in glorious battle, but alone, forgotten." Whimpering in the dark, the bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Chris found herself staring at the tactical display, at the single red dot that represented the last human in the galaxy. Something about Zethkari's decision felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate why. "Sir," she ventured, "perhaps we should confirm the kill. The humans have shown remarkable resilience." "Captain Valerian," Kozlov said, her voice carrying strange harmonics that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull itself. "I want to show you something." The camera panned across the transformed facility, revealing the scope of the biological changes. What had been sterile Velinari architecture was now a fusion of technology and living tissue, pulsing with an alien vitality that defied comprehension. "This is evolution in real time," Kozlov continued. "Your people brought me the gift of your genetic material, your technology, your biological signatures. I've spent the last 3 days incorporating all of it into something new, something better." Valerian felt her blood turn to ice as the implications became clear. "You're not just using the pathogens as weapons. You're integrating with them. I'm becoming them," Kozlov confirmed. "The spores, the fungi, the microorganisms, they're all part of me now, and through me. They're learning everything there is to know about your species, your weaknesses, your strengths, your deepest biological Secrets, the transmission showed close-ups of the organic growths covering the facility. They weren't random, they were structured, purposeful, intelligent. Kozlov hadn't just weaponized the planet's ecosystem. She turned herself into its nerve center. It's controlling intelligence. You think you're safe up there in your metal shells, she said, looking directly at the camera, but you're wrong. The contamination in your ships isn't random. It's targeted, directed. I'm inside your vessels now, learning your systems, mapping your defenses. And soon, the lights on the bridge flickered, and for a moment, Valerian could swear she heard something moving through the ventilation systems. Something that sounded almost like breathing. Sir, Nethkalis reported, his voice tight with fear. Biological readings throughout the ship are spiking. Whatever she's done, it's accelerating. All hands, emergency protocol, Valerian announced. Ship-wide, prepare for immediate atmospheric purge. We're going to vent every contaminated section to space. That will kill anyone not in environmental suits, Yithkalin warned. Everyone's already dead. Valerian replied grimly, we're just choosing how we die. The ship shuddered as explosive decompression tore through contaminated sections, venting atmosphere and biological material into the void. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off compromised areas. For a moment, Impossible, Yithkalin whispered. We vented everything. There should be no contamination left. Unless it's not coming from inside the ship, Valerian realized with growing horror. Unless she's found a way to transmit it directly through space. On the main screen, Kozlov smiled an expression that was no longer entirely human. Did you really think vacuum would stop me? I've learned to survive in conditions that would kill any natural organism. The void between worlds is just another environment to master. Around Terra Prime, the contamination was spreading through the Velinari fleet like wildfire. The Irontide reported complete life support failure. The Conquest's edge was losing structural integrity as biological growth ate through its hull. Plating. One by one, the mighty vessels of the Velinari Armada were being consumed from within. We have to abandon ship. Commander Zarvith's voice crackled over the communication ray from his dying vessel. The contamination has reached critical systems. We're losing everything. Abandon ship to what? Valerian shot back. She's contaminated the entire system. There's nowhere to run. But even as she spoke, Valerian's mind was racing through possibilities. The human had won the biological war through superior knowledge and adaptation, but she was still just one person, connected to her biological network through direct integration. If that connection could be severed, Dr. Yithkalin, she called out, the human's integration with the pathogen network, it has to have limits. She's still fundamentally biological, still vulnerable to physical trauma. You're suggesting a direct assault? Yithkalin asked. Captain, nothing living can survive in that contaminated environment. That we don't send anything living. Valerian replied. Nethkalis, what's the status of our automated systems? Drones, maintenance robots, anything that doesn't require biological operators? Most are contaminated or non-functional, the tactical officer reported. But we have a handful of space-rated maintenance drones in sealed storage. They might still be clean. Prep them for surface deployment. If the human has made herself the center of this biological network, then she's also made herself a single point of failure. It was a desperate gambit, but it was all they had left. The maintenance drones were designed for ship repair in hostile environments. They could operate in vacuum, withstand radiation, and function independently of biological support systems. If they could reach Kozlov before she detected and adapted to the threat, launching drones. Nethkalis announced, time to target, 4 to 7 minutes. On the surface, Dr. Kozlov turned toward the camera, her transformed features showing the first hint of concern. Clever, Captain, but you're still thinking in terms of conventional warfare. You're still assuming I'm bound by the same limitations as other biological entities. The screen went dark, but not before showing something that made Valerian's blood run cold. In the background of the facility, massive organic structures were rising from the ground spore launchers, the size of buildings, preparing to see the contamination throughout the entire star system. The battle for Terra Prime had become a race against time. If the Velinari couldn't stop Dr. Kozlov before those bio-launchers activated, the contamination would spread beyond the planet, beyond the system, eventually reaching every world in the Empire. Humanity's last survivor had become its ultimate weapon of revenge. and she was about to fire it at the galaxy. 3 weeks after the bombardment, the cave systems of Terra Prime's northern continent had become a tomb of silence. The geothermal vents that had once provided life-sustaining warmth now belched toxic gases into the underground labyrinth. Most of the tunnels had collapsed, sealing off entire sections of the complex that had served as humanity's last refuge. In the deepest chamber, Dr. Mira Kozlov pressed her back against the cold stone wall and fought to keep her breathing steady. The shrapnel wound in her left leg had stopped bleeding days ago, but infection was setting in. Her water supply was down to less than a liter, and she hadn't eaten since finding the half-crushed emergency rations 2 days prior. She should have been dead, would have been dead, if not for the bitter irony that her pre-war research had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Mira had been Terra Prime's leading xenobiologist, specializing in the study of Velinari physiology and biochemistry. The military had classified most of her work, while she'd learned enough about their conquerors to understand their weaknesses. The question was whether she could survive long enough to exploit them. A distant rumble echoed through the caverns, not the geological settling she'd grown accustomed to, but something artificial, mechanical. Mira's blood chilled as she recognized the sound of Velinari atmospheric processors. They were terraforming the planet, reshaping it to suit their own environmental needs. She forced herself to stand, ignoring the spike of pain in her leg. If the processors were active, it meant they were bringing in settlers, colonists, a new world for the Velinari Empire, built on the ashes of 8 billion human souls. The sound grew louder, closer. Mira limped deeper into the cave system, following a path she'd memorized during her first week underground. The military had chosen these caves for their natural shielding properties. The dense mineral deposits made them virtually invisible to orbital sensors. But if the Velinari were conducting surface operations, a shaft of artificial light suddenly pierced the darkness ahead. Mira froze, pressing herself against the tunnel wall as the light grew brighter. The characteristic blue-white glow of Velinari illumination panels. They found an entrance. Readings indicate significant mineral deposits in this sector. Came a voice speaking in the clicking, chittering language of the Velinari. Mira's years of study allowed her to follow the conversation. The survey team will map the tunnel system before the extraction crews arrive. Understood. Geological scans show the caves extend for kilometers. We'll need a full sweep. 3 figures emerged from the tunnel ahead. Velinari survey specialists in environmental suits. Their movements careful and methodical. They carried sophisticated scanning equipment and what looked like seismic charges. They were going to map the entire cave system that probably collapsed it to facilitate surface mining. Mira's hand went to the knife at her belt, a pitiful weapon against armored opponents. But her mind was already working, calculating odds and possibilities. The Velinari were methodical, but their very methodical nature made them predictable. They would follow standard survey protocols, which meant, she smiled grimly, the knife wasn't her weapon. Her knowledge was moving as quietly as possible. Mira shadowed the survey team through the tunnels. They worked with professional efficiency, taking readings, placing markers, documenting everything. But they were also breathing the cave's atmosphere through their suits' filtration systems, trusting their technology to keep them safe. The lead surveyor stopped at a junction of 3 tunnels, consulting his scanner. Atmospheric composition is within acceptable parameters, switching to emergency air reserves to conserve main supply. Perfect. Mira had been counting on that. She waited until the team had moved into the eastern tunnel, then crept to the junction. The Velinari had left behind a portable atmosphere processor, a device designed to maintain breathable air in enclosed spaces. Mira had studied similar devices during her research, knew their specifications and limitations. More importantly, she knew about the indigenous fungi that grew in these caves. Fungi that the Velinari scanners would register as harmless plant life. Fungi that produce spores toxic to Velinari respiratory systems, but harmless to humans. Working quickly, Mira opened the processor's intake valve and introduced a handful of the cave fungus. The device would do the rest, circulating the contaminated air through the tunnel system. The Velinari would notice the change in atmospheric composition eventually, but by then, the first scream echoed through the caverns. 20 minutes later, Mira pressed herself against the wall as the 3 Velinari stumbled back through the tunnel, their movements increasingly erratic. The lead surveyor had removed his helmet, his forearms clawing at his throat as his respiratory system began to shut down. Contamination. He gasped in his native tongue. Biological agent. Can't breathe. The second surveyor tried to activate his emergency beacon, but his hands were shaking violently to operate the controls. The third had already collapsed, his exoskeleton dulling as his life signs faded. Mira waited until all three were still before emerging from her hiding place. The Velinari were dead, but their equipment was intact. Communication gear, scanning devices, environmental suits, weapons, everything she needed to take the fight to the surface. As she stripped the smallest surveyor of his equipment, Mira's thoughts turned to Director Kane's final transmission. The woman had been right. Scattered seeds did take root in strange places, but she'd missed something important. Sometimes, those seeds grew into something poisonous. The Velinari had made their second mistake. They had assumed that one human posed no threat, but they had never faced a human who understood their biology, their protocols, their weaknesses. They had never faced a human with nothing left to lose. Mira sealed the environmental suit around her body and activated the communication array. Time to see how many of her new neighbors she could introduce to Terra Prime's indigenous life forms. The Velinari colonial outpost of Sector 7 buzzed with activity as the morning shift began their operations. Prefabricated structures dotted the landscape where the human city of New Geneva had once stood, their surfaces still warm from the overnight geothermal processing. Administrator Kethenel stood on the observation platform of the central command tower, watching with satisfaction as cargo haulers transported raw materials to the orbital elevators. Production is ahead of schedule, reported his aide, Sub-Administrator Krelvos. The human infrastructure was more extensive than anticipated. We've uncovered 17 underground manufacturing facilities intact enough to repurpose. Kethenel clicked his mandibles in approval. The human colony had been remarkably well developed for such a primitive species. Their cities would provide excellent foundations for proper Velinari settlements. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a priority transmission from Survey Team Epsilon. They're reporting atmospheric anomalies in the northern cave systems. Put it through. Kethenel ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of a tunnel system. But instead of the three-member survey team, only one figure appeared, a lone Velinari in a contaminated environmental suit, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Administrator, the surveyor's voice was weak, distorted by his suit's emergency speakers. We've encountered complications, biological contamination in the cave systems. Tethkos and Velmairs they're gone. The figure swayed, and for a moment the camera showed the tunnel behind him. The other environmental suits lay motionless on the ground, their occupants clearly dead. What is the nature of the contamination? Kethenel demanded. Unknown pathogen. The surveyor replied. Respiratory failure. Happened fast. I've sealed my suit, but I can feel it in my lungs. The filters weren't enough. The transmission cut. The static. Kethenel stared at the blank screen, his compound eyes reflecting the warning lights that had begun flashing throughout the command center. A biological contamination event was serious. The Velinari had conquered dozens of worlds, but they'd learned to respect indigenous pathogens that could bypass their sophisticated life support systems. Seal the northern perimeter, he ordered. No personnel are to approach the cave systems until we can dispatch a proper hazmat team, sir. Came another voice from the communications station. We're receiving distress signals from mining platform Delta. They're reporting similar symptoms among their atmospheric processing crew. Kethenel's blood went cold. Mining platform Delta was 20 kilometers from the cave systems, well outside any possible contamination zone, unless display the atmospheric processing network, he commanded. The main screen showed a three-dimensional map of the colony's life support infrastructure. The atmospheric processors were interconnected, sharing filtered air between facilities to maintain consistent environmental conditions. If contamination had entered the system at one point, Emergency Protocol 7, Kethenel announced. Seal all atmospheric processing units and switch to emergency reserves immediately. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The colony's life support system had been contaminated for hours, maybe days. The pathogen was already spreading through the population. Alarms began blaring throughout the command center. As more reports flooded in, Processing Station Gamma was reporting 14 dead. The residential sectors were experiencing widespread respiratory distress. The orbital elevator crew was requesting immediate evacuation. "Sir," Krelvo said, his own breathing becoming labored, "I'm detecting the contamination in the command center's atmosphere, whatever this pathogen is. It's bypassing our standard filtration systems." Kethanol activated his personal environmental suit, but he could already feel the burning in his lungs. The biological agent was incredibly virulent, more aggressive than anything the Velinari had encountered in their centuries of conquest. "Send an emergency transmission to the fleet," he ordered. "Full quarantine protocols. Do not attempt rescue operations until a proper analysis could be conducted." As he spoke, the lights in the command center began flickering. Personnel were collapsing at their stations, their exoskeletons dulling as their life signs faded. The colony of 3,000 Velinari was dying. But how? The planet had been thoroughly sterilized. Every human settlement had been destroyed, every military installation vaporized. The only survivor was that lone female in the caves, and she was wounded, isolated, powerless. Understanding hit Kethanol like a physical blow. The human, the xenobiologist. Her species had been studying Velinari physiology for decades, learning their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. She hadn't just survived the bombardment, she'd weaponized the planet against them. "Give me Captain Valerian on the orbital command ship," he gasped into his communicator. "Emergency. Priority. The human. She's not just surviving, she's fighting back." The transmission cut out as Kethanol collapsed, his administrative tower falling silent around him. Throughout the colony, the lights went out one by one as the Velinari settlers succumbed to the invisible death that had infiltrated their world. High above, in the orbital command vessel, Captain Chris Valerian stared at the silent colony below. The atmospheric processors had gone dark, the cargo haulers had stopped moving, and there were no life signs registering on the scanners. 3,000 dead in less than 6 hours, killed not by weapons or explosives, but by something as simple as spores in the air. Killed by the knowledge and determination of a single human who refused to die quietly. Valerian's hands trembled as she realized the scope of the threat. If the human could weaponize indigenous pathogens, could manipulate the planet's own ecosystem against them, then the Velinari weren't just dealing with a survivor. They were dealing with a walking extinction event. Captain Chris Valerian stood in the cramped confines of the Eternal Conquest War Room. Her 3 fellowship commanders ranged around the holographic display, showing Terra Prime's northern continent. The planet's surface still glowed with the heat of bombardment, but now it held a different kind of threat, one that had just claimed an entire colonial outpost. "The pathogen analysis is complete," announced Dr. Yithkalin, the fleet's chief medical officer. His forearms manipulated the display controls, showing molecular structures and biological charts. "The contamination is a modified strain of indigenous fungal spores, engineered to target Velinari respiratory proteins specifically. It's brilliant, actually. Terrifying, but brilliant." Commander Velthos, the most aggressive of the ship captains, slammed his fist on the table. "You're praising this human pest. She murdered 3,000 of our people." "I'm acknowledging the threat," Yithkalin replied calmly. "This human clearly has extensive knowledge of our physiology. She's turned the planet itself into a weapon against us." Captain Zarveth, commander of the Iron Tide, leaned forward. "The question is, what do we do about it? We can't simply bombard the caves. The mineral deposits would shield her from orbital strikes, and we can't send in ground forces if she can contaminate the atmosphere." Valerian studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The human Dr. Mira Kozlov, according to the intelligence files, had demonstrated capabilities that defied every assumption about human resourcefulness. She was wounded, alone, trapped in a cave system, and yet she'd managed to kill an entire colony using nothing but indigenous microorganisms. "We could irradiate the entire continent," suggested Commander Vel, "and destroy the mineral wealth that makes this planet valuable." Zarv objected. "The Emperor didn't authorize this expedition to acquire a dead rock. The Emperor didn't authorize this expedition to lose entire colonies to a single human, either." Velthos shot back. Valerian raised her hand for silence. "Dr. Yithkalin, how long would it take to develop countermeasures against this pathogen?" "Weeks, possibly months," the medical officer replied. "The spores are highly adaptive. Every sample we've analyzed shows slightly different protein markers, suggesting the human is continuously modifying them. She's evolving them," Valerian realized. adapting them to counter our defenses faster than we can respond. The implications were staggering. A single human scientist was outmaneuvering the combined medical expertise of a galactic empire. But that also suggested a weakness. She was working alone, with limited resources. Under enormous stress, everyone had a breaking point. New tactical assessment, Valerian announced. We're going to force her to make a mistake. Dr. Yithkalin, I want you to prepare biological warfare countermeasures not to cure the pathogen, but to contain it. Sealed environmental suits, isolated life support systems, everything we need to operate in a contaminated environment. That will take considerable time and resources, Yithkalin warned. Then we'll give her something else to worry about. Valerian said grimly, Commander Velthos, you're going to establish a new colonial outpost. Sector 9, 50 kilometers south of the contaminated zone. Velthos' compound eyes widened. Captain, that's well within the potential spread radius of the pathogen. Exactly. But this time, we're going to be ready for it. Sealed facilities, independent life support, full contamination protocols, and we're going to make sure she knows we're there. The plan was ruthless in its simplicity. Establish a new colony, heavily defended and properly equipped to handle biological threats. Then broadcast its location and purpose to the cave systems. Using every communication frequency available, force the human to choose between allowing the Velinari to establish a permanent foothold on her world, or emerging from her hiding place to attack. She'll have to expose herself, Valerian explained. The pathogen delivery system requires direct contamination of our atmospheric processors. She can't do that from the caves, and when she does, ask ZARV-TH, we'll be waiting. The new colony went up in record time. Modular structures designed for hostile environments, each with its own sealed life support system. The atmospheric processors were isolated, with multiple redundant filtration systems and automated contamination detection. Everything was designed to withstand biological warfare. But Valerian had also ensured that the colony appeared vulnerable. The atmospheric processors were positioned to suggest weak points. In a defense grid, the personnel movements followed predictable patterns to an outside observer, particularly one with limited intelligence gathering capabilities. The colony would look like another easy target. The broadcast began immediately, transmitted on all frequencies in multiple languages including basic human. Attention, Terra Prime survivor, your terrorist attack on our peaceful colony has been noted and documented. We are establishing a permanent military outpost in Sector 9. This facility will serve as the staging ground for the complete pacification of your world. Your resistance has been noted, cataloged, and will be terminated. The message repeated every hour, designed to provoke a response. But what they received was something far more disturbing. I know what you're doing, came the reply, transmitted. On the same frequencies, Dr. Mira Kozlov's voice was steady, controlled. But there was something in her tone that made Valerian's blood run cold. You think I'm trapped down here, that I have to come to you, but you're wrong. I'm not trapped with you on this planet. You're trapped with me. The transmission included detailed schematics of the new colony's layout, accurate down to the ventilation systems and power distribution networks. Somehow, the human had been watching them, studying them, learning their new defensive measures in real time. You want to know how I've been monitoring your operations? Kozlov continued. The survey team you lost wasn't just carrying scanning equipment. They were carrying long-range communication arrays. I've been using your own technology to watch you build your little fortress, and I've been preparing something special for your grand opening. The transmission cut out, leaving the war room in stunned silence. She's been spying on us, ZARV-TH whispered. Using our own equipment against us, impossible, Velthos protested. Our communication systems are encrypted, biometrically locked. The survey team, Valerian interrupted, realization dawning. They weren't just killed by the pathogen. She took their equipment, their access codes, their biological authentication keys. She's been inside our network from the beginning. The tactical display flickered, and suddenly the room was filled with the image of Dr. Mira Kozlov herself. She sat in what appeared to be a modified Velinari environmental suit, surrounded by jury-rigged equipment and biological specimens. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, but her expression was one of fierce determination. You wanted to see me, she said, looking directly at the camera. Here I am, the last human in the galaxy, the ghost of Terra Prime, and I have a message for your emperor. She held up a small container filled with what looked like ordinary soil. "This is the future of your empire. Every world you've conquered, every species you've exterminated, every victory you've celebrated, all of it ends here. Because I've done something your collective scientific minds never imagined possible. I've created a pathogen that can survive in space, that can lie dormant for decades, that can infect any world, any atmosphere, any population you seed with. Your presence." Valerian's hands flew to the communication controls, trying to cut the transmission. But the signal was too strong, too deeply integrated into their own systems. "You came to my world to kill us all," Kozlov continued. "You succeeded, but in doing so, you've given me something more valuable than any weapon your empire has ever faced. You've given me nothing left to lose." The image cut out, leaving the war room in darkness except for the emergency lighting. Outside, alarms began blaring throughout the ship as contamination warnings flooded the bridge systems. The battle for Terra Prime had begun, and the Velinari were no longer fighting for conquest. They were fighting for survival. The first spores reached the Sector 9 colony at 03 for 7 hours ship time, carried by the prevailing winds from the northern cave systems. The automated detection system screamed warnings as atmospheric processors throughout the facility began registering unprecedented biological contamination levels. Commander Velthos stood in the sealed command bunker, watching his screens as the colony's defenses engaged. 43 separate atmospheric filtering systems activated simultaneously, each one designed to handle the most virulent biological threats the Velinari had ever encountered. But the readings continued to climb. "Contamination levels are off the charts," reported Chief Medical Officer Geth Culler, her forearms dancing across the control interfaces. "The pathogen is adapting to our countermeasures in real time. It's like it's learning from each filtration attempt." "Impossible," Velthos. "Unless it was designed to," came a voice from the communication array. Dr. Mira Kozlov's image appeared on the screens, transmitted from somewhere within the colony's own network. "Your species has spent centuries perfecting biological warfare. You know exactly how to counter standard pathogens, so I made sure mine weren't standard." The view switched to external cameras, showing the colony's perimeter. What Velthos saw made his exoskeleton go cold. The very air around the facility seemed to shimmer with an almost organic quality, as if the atmosphere itself had become hostile. "Genetic memory," Kozlov explained, her voice carrying over the emergency alarms. "I've engineered these spores with the complete genetic history of every biological defense mechanism your species has ever developed, every filtration system, every medical countermeasure, every environmental protocol. They're not just resistant to your defenses, they're specifically designed to overcome them." "Seal all external airlocks," Velthos ordered. "Switch to emergency life support. No outside air gets in." But even as he gave the commands, he could see it was too late. The contamination readings were spiking inside the facility. Somehow, the pathogen was already breaching their defenses. "Sir," called Tactical Officer Jethkris, "we're receiving distress signals from the residential sectors. Personnel are reporting respiratory distress, system failures, complete life support breakdown. Emergency evacuation," Velthos commanded. "All personnel to the orbital shuttles. We're abandoning the facility. Belay that order," came Captain Valerian's voice from the orbital command ship. "No shuttles are to leave the surface. We cannot risk contaminating the fleet." Velthos spun toward the communication array. "Captain, we have 1,200 personnel down here. They'll die if we don't evacuate them. They're already dead," Valerian replied grimly. "And if we bring them up here, they'll take the entire fleet with them." The bitter truth of the situation crashed down on Velthos. They were expendable, sacrificial pieces in a larger game. The colony had been built not to succeed, but to serve as a testing ground for the humans' capabilities, and now they were paying the price for that strategy. "Fuck your orders," Velthos snarled, switching to the colony's internal communication system. "All personnel, this is Commander Velthos. We're being abandoned by the fleet, but we're not going to die quietly." He activated the colony's automated defense systems, turning them inward. If they were going to die, they would die fighting. The facility's energy barriers flared to life, not to keep threats out, but to keep the contamination from spreading. The atmospheric processor switched to maximum output, flooding the colony with every chemical compound they could produce. "You want to kill us with our own air," Velthos broadcast to the cave systems. "Then you'll have to breathe it too. What followed was a symphony of destruction. The colony's industrial facilities went into overdrive, producing chemical compounds designed to neutralize biological threats. The manufacturing plants began churning out toxic gases, flooding the surrounding atmosphere with substances lethal to organic life. The geothermal plants were overloaded, sending superheated steam and radioactive vapors into the cave systems. But for every countermeasure the Velinari deployed, the human had an answer. The pathogen adapted, evolved, overcame. Personnel began collapsing at their stations, their life support systems failing one by one. But they kept fighting, kept trying to hurt their unseen enemy. Medical reports coming in, get caller announced, her own voice growing weak. The pathogen is causing complete respiratory system failure. But it's not just killing us, it's learning from us. Every death provides it with new genetic information. It's using us as a laboratory. Velthos realized every person it kills makes it stronger. In the orbital command ship, Captain Valerian watched the horror unfold below. The colony's life signs were failing one by one, but the contamination readings were growing stronger. The human hadn't just weaponized the planet, she'd weaponized death itself, sir, reported her tactical officer. We're detecting unusual energy signatures from the colony. They're overloading their industrial systems. They're trying to poison the atmosphere, Valerian realized. But as she watched, something else appeared on the scanners, moving through the contaminated zone. Immune to the toxins and pathogens came a single human figure. Dr. Mira Kozlov was leaving the caves, walking openly through the poisoned wasteland. That had been Sector 9. She's not wearing environmental protection, the tactical officer reported, his voice filled with disbelief. She's breathing the contaminated air directly. Valerian's blood went cold. The human had done more than just weaponize the planet's ecosystem. She'd adapted herself to it, made herself immune to the very weapons she created. She wasn't just the architect of this biological nightmare, she was its living embodiment. On the surface, Dr. Kozlov walked calmly through the dying colony, her modified physiology allowing her to survive in an environment that would kill any other sentient being around her. The last Velinari defenders collapsed at their posts, their weapons useless against an enemy that had turned the very air into a weapon. 1,200 dead, she broadcast to the fleet above. Sector 9 is a graveyard. Your move, Captain Valerian. The silence that followed was deafening. In a span of 18 hours, a single human had eliminated an entire military colony using nothing but genetically modified microorganisms. The Velinari Empire, which had conquered 4 to 7 worlds through superior firepower and tactical brilliance, had been outmaneuvered by a wounded scientist armed with nothing but knowledge and determination. But this was only the beginning. As the contaminated zone expanded, carrying its lethal cargo on the planetary winds, Captain Valerian realized that the battle for Terra Prime was about to become something far more dangerous. It was about to become a battle for the survival of the Velinari species itself. The eternal conquest hung in high orbit above Terra Prime, its massive hull scarred by 3 days of constant biological warfare. Captain Chris Valerian stood on the bridge, her environmental suit sealed against the contamination that had somehow infiltrated even there. Orbital defenses around her. The ship's crew worked with desperate efficiency, their movements hampered by the bulky protective gear that had become their only defense against invisible death. Contamination report, she ordered, her voice echoing through the suit's communication system. 17 more decks compromised, replied Chief Medical Officer Yithkalin, his normally steady voice betraying exhaustion. The pathogen is spreading through the ventilation systems faster than we can seal them. We've lost contact with Engineering Section C, and the weapons bay is completely contaminated. Valerian closed her eyes, fighting the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. In 72 hours, Dr. Mira Kozlov had transformed from a desperate survivor into an extinction-level threat. The woman had somehow managed to contaminate 3 orbital vessels, eliminate to ground installations, and turn the planet's entire ecosystem into a weapon targeting Velinari physiology. Sir, came the voice of Tactical Officer Neth Collis. We're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's the human. Put it through. Valerian commanded, dreading what she might hear. The main screen flickered to life, showing Dr. Kozlov standing in what had once been the Sector 9 command center. But the facility had been transformed into something alien. Biomechanical growths covered the walls, and the very air seemed to move with organic purpose. Kozlov herself looked different too. Her skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality, and her eyes held an unsettling glow. Captain Valerianthe maintenance drones descended through Terra Prime's poisoned atmosphere, like metallic angels of death, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they cut through the contaminated air. Captain Valerian watched their progress from the dying bridge of the Eternal Conquest. Her hands clenched so tightly around the command rail that her knuckles had gone white. Beneath her environmental suit, 30 seconds to target, reported Tactical Officer Nethkalis, his voice distorted by the failing communication systems around them. The bridge crew worked frantically at stations that sparked, and smoke from biological contamination eating through their circuitry. Below, the massive bio-launchers that Dr. Mira Kozlov had grown from the planet's corrupted ecosystem were almost ready to fire, each structure pulsed with organic purpose, loaded with spores designed to survive interstellar travel and seed themselves across the galaxy. If they launched, the Velinari Empire wouldn't just lose Terra Prime, they would face extinction on every world they'd ever conquered. She's detected the drones, Nethkalis announced as the surface scanners showed defensive organisms emerging from the biomechanical growths. Airborne interceptors looked like weaponized fungal colonies. The first drone exploded in a burst of acidic spores. As living missiles struck it from multiple angles, the second lasted longer, its armor plating holding against the biological assault, until corrosive agents ate through its power systems. But the third drone broke through the defensive perimeter, its nuclear payload armed and ready. In the transformed command center below, Dr. Kozlov stood amid her biomechanical throne room. Her consciousness expanded through the organic network that now covered half the continent. She could feel the drone's approach, taste the metallic tang of its construction through her extended senses. "You're too late," she broadcast to the dying fleet above. Her voice had become something inhuman, a harmony of tones that resonated through organic tissue and quantum frequencies alike. "The launchers are primed. In 3 minutes, 40 billion spores will begin their journey to your homeworld, to every world you conquered, to every planet where Velinari blood has been spilled in the name of empire." But Captain Valerian had spent those crucial minutes studying the biological readings from the surface, as she'd noticed something important. The massive energy expenditure required to maintain the bio-launchers was draining power from Kozlov's other systems. The contamination spread throughout the fleet was actually weakening as resources were diverted to the launch preparation. "All remaining crew," she announced over the ship's communication system, "emergency power to weapons systems. We're going to give that drone the cover it needs." The Eternal Conquest groaned as its dying systems channeled every remaining erg of power into its orbital bombardment array around the planet. The surviving ships of the fleet followed suit, their energy weapons charging despite the biological contamination eating through their hulls. "Sir," Yitzkalin called out, "the power drain will cause complete ship failure. Then we'll die like warriors," Valerian replied. "Fire everything." The combined fury of a dozen Velinari warships lit up Terra Prime's atmosphere like a second sun. Orbital bombardment cannons designed to crack planets poured their energy into the biomechanical structures below. Not to destroy them, the biological matrix was too resilient for that, but to disrupt their delicate energy balance. The effect was immediate. The bio-launchers wavered, their organic components struggling to maintain cohesion under the massive energy input. And in that moment of vulnerability, the final maintenance drone struck home. The nuclear detonation vaporized a 3-kilometer radius around Dr. Kozlov's command center, turning the biological nerve center into superheated plasma. But even as the explosion consumed her transformed body, Kozlov's voice echoed across the communication channels one last time. "You think you've won." The transmission was breaking up, distorted by radiation and system failures. "I am every spore, every microorganism, every breath of poison air. I am the planet now, and the planet remembers." The bio-launchers collapsed as their controlling intelligence was severed, spilling their deadly cargo harmlessly across the already contaminated surface. Throughout the dying fleet, contamination readings began to drop as the coordinated biological assault lost its central direction. But the victory came at a terrible price. Of the 3,000 ships that had come to conquer Terra Prime, fewer than 200 remained functional. 60,000 Velinari were dead, their bodies consumed by biological agents that defied every medical countermeasure. Their empire had developed. Captain Valerian sat in the ruins of her bridge, watching the planet slowly cool below. The bombardment had broken the biological network's coordination, but Terra Prime itself remained a poisoned wasteland. Nothing would ever grow there again except death. Captain, came a weak voice from the communication station. We're receiving a message from the homeworld. They're asking for a status report. Valerian almost laughed. Status report. How did you explain that humanity's last survivor had nearly destroyed the most powerful empire in the galaxy, using nothing but determination and the biological weapons their own arrogance had provided? Tell them, she said finally, that the human species has been eliminated. The planet Terra Prime is conquered and pacified. It was technically true. Dr. Mira Kozlov was dead, her biological network disrupted, her revenge incomplete. But as Valerian looked down at the poisoned world below, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The Velinari had always conquered through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. They had never faced an enemy that could turn their own biology against them, that could weaponize knowledge itself. They had never encountered a species that would choose mutual destruction over submission. Sir, Nethkalis reported, long range. Sensors are detecting unusual readings from the outer system. The contamination, it may have spread further than we thought. Valerian closed her eyes. Perhaps Dr. Kozlov's revenge wasn't as incomplete as she'd hoped. Perhaps the spores had found another way to spread, carried by solar winds or electromagnetic fluctuations or simple molecular drift. Or perhaps the real weapon hadn't been the biological agents at all. Perhaps it had been the idea of the demonstration, that even the mightiest empire could be brought low by a single individual with nothing left to lose. As the surviving Velinari ships limped away from Terra Prime, they carried with them more than just the scars of battle. They carried the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy, other species were watching, other conquered peoples were learning, other survivors were taking notes. The Velinari Empire had won the battle for Terra Prime, but they had lost something far more precious, the myth of their own invincibility. And in the poisoned ruins of humanity's last world, that lesson would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. The empire that had conquered 47 worlds would eventually fall, not to superior armies or advanced weapons, but to the simple, terrifying truth that Dr. Mira Kozlov had proven with her life. Sometimes all it takes to topple an empire is one person who refuses to die quietly. The last human was gone, but her legacy, the knowledge that even gods could bleed, would outlive them all. Zethkari's voice carried a note of warning. The human species is extinct. That lone survivor changes nothing. She has no weapons, no communications, no way off-world. She will die within days, and with her, the last echo of human defiance. He turned to face the bridge crew, his compound eyes glittering with satisfaction. Prepare to depart. The Emperor expects our report within the week. This campaign is concluded. As the massive dreadnought and his escort fleet turned away from the burning world, Chris couldn't shake the memory of Director Kane's smile. There had been something in that expression, not despair or resignation, but something else entirely. Something that suggested the humans had one last card to play. Behind them, Terra Prime continued to burn, its cities reduced to ash, its people to memory. But in the deep caves of the northern continent, a single heart continued to beat, a single mind continued to think, a single human continued to endure. The Velinari